Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The movie podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We've got a fantastic show this week with 3 brand new reviews, which all are now playing in theaters. This week on the show, create something to fear in this prequel to the 1976 film in The First Omen. Welcome to the frontlines in Asphalt City. And finally, one small ember can burn down everything in Monkey Man. We've got a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows to watch, a roar and a bursting of flames. The Movie Wire podcast. We just need people like me.
Podcast for hot and trending movies.
The Wire.
And here we go.
An anonymous young man unleashes a campaign of vengeance against the corrupt leaders who murdered his mother and continue to systematically victimize the poor and powerless in Monkey Man.
When I was a boy, my mother used to tell me a story of a demon king and his army. They brought fire and terror to the land. Until they faced the protector of the people, the white monkey.
There you are. You are a beast.
In this city, the rich don't see us as people. Give me the job no one wants to do, I'll do it.
Anyone who forgets their place, it doesn't turn out well for them.
This is not the place to work if you can't handle that sort of stuff.
Every day, I've prayed for a way to protect the weak.
I've got an answer to every prayer. I call her Nikki. Minaj, big bumper, nice headlights. Let's boogie.
You need to fight for your mother, for all of us.
Anger will not quiet your soul, my son.
Don't call me son.
It's time to remember who you are.
But only love kills more when will they learn?
Just one small ember can burn down everything.
Mark you.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for a fight? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And here we go. go! Monkey movie number 2, 2 weeks in a row. This time we have Dev Patel with his directorial debut, and who also stars as Kid, an underage fighter who sports a gorilla mask to be beaten night after night for cash. That is, until he finds a way to infiltrate the elite responsible for killing his mother. I'm usually very picky with my action movies, and in defense, at this point in the cinematic evolution of stories, one might say we have seen it all. How many one-liners, how many different angles do we need to see people shooting at each other? Or what setting they're shooting at each other in? Or how quick the editing can be to attempt to trick the audience in believing that the scene is exciting. Over the years in action movies, we forget about characters and caring about characters, and studios go all in with choreographed action scenes and load the movie full of editors. And as an audience, as a viewer, we are asked to lower our standards and just judge an action movie, not by the character, not by the story, but how fast a character can move and shoot during an action scene. Now, when it comes to Monkey Man, many would compare this revenge story to John Wick, and even though it has a lot of story similarities and character similarities, it does something different, and noticeably different. It takes its time to have fun with itself. It takes its time to ensure the action is appreciated. It involves more interesting dialogue, and lastly, it's a visual marvel, not just in action scenes, but during the entire runtime. And just to backpedal a little bit so I don't get flack from John Wick fans, I'm not saying that John Wick movies are bad, but what I will say, even though I can picture many of you getting up from their seat after what I'm about to say to give me the finger after saying I enjoyed Monkey Man a lot more than I did the Wick films. As I said in my John Wick 4 review in episode 65, me and the John Wick films didn't get along. I had a John Wick curse of not being able to keep my eyes open during the runtime. And I don't know if it was the constant humming of gunfire, the slow-paced dialogue, or the fact we have the same characters with no expressions or emotions on screen, or the fact the action scenes are all just blended together. And again, I'm not saying those films are bad. They did what they sought out to do, which is to see Keanu Reeves kick some ass. Those films have a particular audience, and they're made for action fans, hardcore action fans. But here is where Monkey Man succeeded on a higher level of entertainment for me. First and foremost, the characters are interesting and have an on-screen likability. Picture Keanu Reeves, but with all the characters. Dev Patel as our main character Kid may not have a huge amount of dialogue or profound things to say here, but he balances it with a stern but empathetic on-screen presence of body language. And with any director, it's already challenging to direct yourself, but as a first-time director, the character direction here is pretty spot on, at least at an entertainment level. And finally, with all these action movies coming out, I love the fact that the characters on screen are written so if a character is bad, we have a reason to root for his ass to be kicked. If a character is good, we want to cheer him on. We get both of these here, especially during the third act where we hear a big crowd chant Monkey Man. I wanted to cheer along with this crowd. The next piece that elevates this movie is the action. This is what separates Monkey Man from the more modern American action movies. It realizes something I've said over the years with action movies. Constant gunfire isn't entertaining to me, especially if we have scenes that go over 10 minutes of just people shooting back and forth at each other with quick edits. Patel is smart here. He limits the gunfire and utilizes the camera to follow the action. Yes, we do have quick editing at times, but the camera stays glued onto our characters' fight moves. We get to see the detail with every movement. We get to appreciate the choreographed work from our filmmakers. This adds to a level of engagement. There was a point where I really needed to use the restroom, and in a lot of these current action movies, I would usually wait, and I would wait for a fight scene between the main character and a useless character because we know what the outcome's gonna be, and we're gonna see the same stuff. I would wait for those scenes to get up and go. Here, I found myself not wanting to get up during the fight scenes. They sucked me in. My eyes were following every single detail of what was happening on screen. Monkey Man was written by new writer Paul Onganuela, Happy Feet and Master and Commander writer Joe Colley, and our director Dave Patel. Now, with two newer writers, Onganuela and Patel, there is no doubt there are going to be flaws in the writing here, and we see this prominently in the second half of the movie, especially when our main character Kid visits our Yoda-like character Tabla, played by Zakir Hussain, who helps him to discover his inner self and what he's capable of. This scene is fantastic, but needed less editing cuts and more time with these two in conversation. There is a chemistry here that were never truly explored. This also shows with kids. I would call him his right-hand man, Alfonso, played by Pitobash, who is our fast-talking comic relief character that unknowingly helps Kid gain access to some big players in the film. In each scene Alfonso is in, he steals the spotlight, but the chemistry between him and Kid are just barely missing the mark. But even so, where the skill lies, even when we see some of these flaws, it was hard for me to not really enjoy myself with these characters and the conflicts that were happening on screen. Along with the compliment of the camera work by Patel that's perfectly accompanied by stunning colors, visuals, and the music that is spot on. Every technical aspect seems to just have the intent to be fun entertainment, but with the characters and the story that we want to follow, not that we are told to follow. Monkey Man made me want to re-screen this film, not because I was unsure about my rating, but rather it was just a fun time at the movies. It's been a long time since I had fun with an action picture. Does it reinvent the wheel? No, but it rather takes us back a couple decades to show us the discovery of the wheel, and it embodies that with the bloody shock factor gore of today. More importantly, it does something that not many action movies in recent history have done: stand out, and ensures I remember it and what happened during it. Monkey Man is a refreshing adrenaline rush that doesn't have the filmmakers yelling to the set, "We need more bang bang and we need more boom boom." I'm giving Monkey Man 3.5 stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure you check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
Jack Black is back as Poe, a kung fu fighting panda, as he faces a new threat, just without any of the fun. And skadoosh. It's a lazy cash grab in Kung Fu Panda 4, which received 1.5 stars. On the eve of World War II, one man did the impossible: save one life, save the world, with Anthony Hopkins in One Life, which portrayed a beam of light in a dark time in the world's history, receiving 3 stars. A true story of a hairdresser that rallies a community to help a widowed father save the life of a child in Ordinary Angels, that made me shed a tear and cheer, receiving 3 stars. Meet Chauncey. He's not imaginary and he's not your friend, and he is the main character of a horrible movie in Imaginary, which received 1.5 stars. There's no love for Bob Marley's One Love, that received 1.5 stars. Madam Web just hit streaming, and Nobody Cares, receiving 1.5 stars. No man is left behind in the Russell Crowe thriller Land of the Bad, which took me to the land of good popcorn flick, receiving 3 stars. And finally, a story of 2 ladies going south in Ethan Coen's Drive Away Dolls, which took no time to really go south, receiving 2.5 stars. You can check out those reviews of my previous episodes, and while you do, don't forget to hit follow or subscribe, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Now, before we get into the last set of reviews, there is a podcast with a host that has become my cinema podcast partner in crime with our new show that we've partnered with on Back to the Balcony. We originally got together on his original show that is part of my weekly listen. It's a fantastic show. It's a fabulous show. And that's with Antonio over the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. Not only do we have our show Back to the Balcony, but you can also check out my appearance on Antonio's latest episode of the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast, where we cover dramatic tunes. Antonio brings the 1985 claymation film The Adventures of Mark Twain, and I decided to go more artsy by bringing the Chipmunk Adventure. That episode is now live, and again, all you need to do is click that link, the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast, in the description of this episode. But let's hear from Antonio over the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast now.
The Cultworthy Podcast. Join me, Antonio Palacios, each week as I guide you through a never-ending sea of obscure cinema and cult-worthy gems that deserve a rediscovery. Find me on all listening platforms and at thecultworthy.com. The Cultworthy Podcast. Join us.
You don't have to be afraid.
A young American woman is sent to Rome to begin a life of service to the church. but encounters a darkness that causes her to question her faith and uncovers a terrifying conspiracy that hopes to bring about the birth of an evil incarnate. In the prequel to the 1976 film The Omen comes The First Omen.
God has great plans for you. This child is his way.
There's this girl at the orphanage. I think that she really needs someone to look out for her.
Carlita suffers from a touch of madness.
You must be very careful, Margaret. Bad things will start to happen around her. Evil things.
It's all for you. No, don't.
What does any of this have to do with Carlita?
This church has maintained power for thousands of years. Lady will stop at nothing to keep it that way. How do you control people who no longer believe? You create something to fear. I believe the girl is to be the mother.
Mother of what?
It's the mark of the devil.
It's not real. 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 Who said that?
This is very real.
Now, prequels, reboots, and sequels that take a decade or more usually fail more often than they succeed, especially when it comes to horror movies. It's been 48 years since the first Omen film hit theaters and 18 years since the rebooted version starring Liv Schreiber and Julia Stiles. Now, if you don't remember the 2006 rebooted Omen, lucky you that it vanished from your memory. Since The Omen hit theaters in 1976, it has spawned a total of 6 films, including this one, with 2 of those being direct sequels to the original. Now, the first Omen had many surprises in it for me. The first was how much I actually did like it, and 2, the absolute vision, skill, and attention to detail our first major motion picture director, Arkasha Stevenson, put into this film. While watching The First Omen, it had me thinking throughout its entire runtime. It made me notice a lot of the directorial style. I was making comments in my head, such that was a brilliant or cool shot, or the director just nailed that shot, or the lighting. And the detail in each scene is utterly fantastic. I had these thoughts more times than I can keep track of. A lot of these thoughts going through my head, I thought my notepad was going to catch on fire. I didn't look up any of the information on The First Omen before my first viewing, and during my viewing, I felt anxious to want to pull out my phone and see who this director was. When the credits rolled, I saw the name of Arkasha Stevenson. It didn't ring any bells for me. Right when I left the theater, I looked her up and I was amazed for this to be her first major motion picture. Now, folks, this is a director that wants to prove her skills. There is a scene where we have our main character, Margaret, played by Nell Tiger Free, as she's alone in what they call the bad room for misbehaving children. We look at the door behind her to see tiny fingernail scratches on the door, to even subtle oil from fingertips making a subtle cross. These details are subtle and will be easily missed in this movie. But as I was appreciating Stevenson's skill, my eyes began to wander all over the screen to see what little details she makes with the camera, from the way the bed is set diagonally in a room to the up-close shots to focus on the ones not talking in the scene to gain a sense of danger. There is some absolutely brilliant skill here. This would be a shame that this wouldn't be noticed during awards time. But unfortunately, a horror movie's chances are slim, especially if we're to notice a new director of a horror film. Not only will Stevenson be on my list for best directors at the end of this year, but one to really keep an eye on over the years. Now, The First Omen doesn't try and reinvent the wheel when it comes to story. The story is pieces that we've seen in thrillers and horror movies time and time again, and even elements from the original films. But what makes this movie stand out is the slow burn and pacing. The film never gets ahead of itself and it stays true to the vision. As we learn about our new nun, Margaret, we are introduced to new characters and the movie never feels the need to really get to know these characters or get a huge backstory of dialogue. We are following alongside Margaret along this story, being introduced to characters, information, threats as she sees them. The viewer is never privileged to more information than our main character. This is one of the biggest mistakes a lot of horror movies make. Take, for example, Immaculate that just got reviewed on this show. And for some, this style might not be for everyone. Because you know what, I get it. Some like their horror movies that move on a quicker pace and like to see the situation first and then see how our characters react. The more recent horror film, Imaginary, would be a good example of this, where when we do this, it may add a certain fast-paced piece of entertainment for 90 minutes, but it doesn't make it memorable and it doesn't add any value. The First Omen gives a level of uncomfort when it comes to the way it presents itself, and this is also due in part to the cinematography from Aaron Morton, who we can see a bit of his style in the upcoming Abigail movie that releases here soon. The First Omen takes place in Rome in 1971, a time of cigarette-smoking nuns, protest extreme punishment on children. This is the perfect time, the perfect setting to set the scene for our Antichrist to rise. We add in the less is more from our story and characters and allow the setting and environment to really complement how our characters progress to build an unsettling progression that always seems to stay with you until the credits roll. This is a perfect recipe for success. Now, as I've said on the show before, my biggest pet peeve is a lot of jump scares. There's a difference between relying on it and just kind of adding it. The First Omen does have a couple moments of jump scares that didn't seem necessary, but at the same time, it actually did make me jump, because when they happened, I wasn't expecting it from what the movie was building. This is largely due in part to the spot-on editing and direction from Stevenson. As we get into the third act, all the elements are working for me in this movie. The only thing I can really spot on a flaw is the writing here. The writing here is the only thing that really holds this movie back from being truly something special. As I said earlier, the movie doesn't try and reinvent the wheel when it comes to story, neither does the dialogue. The dialogue goes from simplistic to cliche, but never really lands on what it truly wants its characters to say. Though the progression of the characters are well done, The First Omen was written by Tim Smith, Keith Thomas, and our director Arkasha Stevenson, which are all first-time writers to their first major motion picture. With a lot of newbies on this movie, this is where it does feel prominent, but it's not enough to throw off or derail this movie, which is also helped by everything else from direction, editing, music, and the cinematography here. But again, a little before the midway point, I was able to predict where the movie was going, which is a shame when it comes to a movie that has so much going for it. But to its credit, to take a different perspective, I did feel like the dialogue was paying homage to the way the movies like this were written in the late 70s to mid 80s. But the audio doesn't match the video when it comes to style in this film. The First Omen came out of nowhere, especially when it comes to how much I was set back and impressed with it. It won't be everybody's cup of tea, but for honoring the original, the technical achievements, and the mere uncomfort that it gave me throughout the runtime is a triumph. And the best thing that will come from this movie is the introduction to a fantastic director that will be one to remember, Arkasha Stevenson. I'm giving The First Omen 3.5 stars. Ollie Cross, played by Ty Sheridan, is a young paramedic assigned to the New York City night shift with an uncompromising in-season partner, Gene Ratoski, played by Sean Penn. Each 911 call is often dangerous and uncertain, putting their lives on the line every day to help others. In Asphalt City.
You believe in heaven? I don't know if I believe in heaven, but I believe in hell.
1, 2, 3. How long you been on the job?
A few weeks. This guy was from Colorado. I'm putting him in with Russ.
I usually get here 10 minutes early, and I like to ride with partners who do too.
Yes, sir.
Tubby. They'll die if you don't tube.
Go, go, go.
You think these people like you?
Outside with the dog. We're trying to treat them.
You think you're saving people?
I give you about 2 weeks.
What's going on?
30-year-old female. She just gave birth.
Took some heroin for the pain. How's the baby?
I know what you're thinking. Is it worth it?
It's the job. I did what I thought was right.
You ain't got what it takes for this life here.
You start doing this because you want to help people.
I want to go to the hospital.
Let's go, let's get a life here.
Sometimes you just end up doing the complete opposite.
Do it.
Tell the truth.
Do it.
Did paramedic Rukowski intentionally withhold treatment?
What am I doing?
Helping people get better.
I'm worried about you. You need help.
I told them it was a mistake.
Get away from me.
Seriously, man, be careful.
We all work in the darkness. You don't gotta let it inside you.
You ain't got what it takes for this life here.
Asphalt City is one of those movies that I hope over time will be appreciated. Now, I have said on this show numerous times when I walked out of a movie with a big question mark hovering over my head. I questioned why I liked something but couldn't explain it. There are times where the movie made me confused by what the filmmakers were trying to do, and I couldn't decipher what I was feeling walking out of the film. These movies, when I have a lingering question mark, I have to replan my week by rewatches before I write the review to ensure that I have it just right. Asphalt City now holds my record on the most rewatches in a movie in one day. When I first walked out of Asphalt City, I had a feeling of empathy for our characters as Sean Penn and Sheridan played on screen, because we haven't had a ton of such raw, full-length movies that focus on paramedics and their challenges with their mental stability and their job. But then the more I thought about it as I was walking in the parking lot of the theater on how empty I felt by the time the credits rolled, my emotions were mixed about this picture. So instead of going home, I checked the next showing, and to my luck, it was in 23 minutes. So I got another ticket and went right back in. This day at the movies consisted of rewatching Asphalt City 3 times. As I walked out of my final showing, walked out of Asphalt City for my third viewing, and being mentally exhausted, I realized it wasn't because I was trying to figure out how I felt about this film, but rather just watching our characters on screen as they work as paramedics, and how raw of a journey our director Jean-Stéphane Sévère takes us on. Now, I know there's gotta be some level of exaggeration to some of the scenes in this movie, but there's no question that the situations our paramedics are in are pieced together from multiple sources and stories from real-life paramedics. My feelings the first go-around watching this movie was that I wasn't prepared to absorb what I was about to see. After my last viewing, I felt like I was on a week-long ride-along with our 2 paramedics that do have a job to do but are also human and have human emotions with eternal conflicts that our filmmakers present in such a subtle way. Our Asphalt City writers, Ben McBrown from Men in Black 3 and Public Enemies, new writer Ryan King, along with a writing credit from our director Jean-Stéphane Sévère, what they do here, they don't spoon-feed us what our characters are going through. They treat the viewer as we are looking to these characters on a daily basis and seeing the progression of mental decline and the internal struggle with their job. Now, within the last couple of years, the media has given us a point of view surrounding those that are here to help and protect us, with most of the time this is portrayed as a canvas painted as a dark and negative landscape. And Asphalt City teeters a fine line between this landscape to a subtle burst of hope. We have doctors that have to cross every T and dot every I. We have the police that are under a magnifying glass. And here, portrayed in Asphalt City, we have paramedics that demonstrate the will to want to do good, but ask the audience exactly the question of, where is the line between human emotion and professionalism? How does one keep their moral compass in check? There is a powerful scene where Sean Penn and Sheridan visit a scene where a mother is giving early birth, only to find out that she is using heroin and is HIV positive. This scene is hard to watch, and viewers will be mixed on their opinions on what happens. But at the end of the day, it's a true example of one of the most challenging parts of the job, which is to turn off our moral commentary to do the job in the moment, to save every life they can. But it is also a pivotal scene of a turning point where we as an audience have to ask, where is the line between the will to want to help others, but who is helping those that are sent to help us? Are we showing gratitude for those that are there to help that have to see negative things each and every day? Or are we amplifying the negatives we see in the media? And finally, did we forget that we have people that picked a profession with the desire to help humanity, and even more so forget that in these professions, at the end of the day, that we are all human? This is what makes Asphalt City a multi-watch, and I hope it is appreciated down the road, because we get an inner look of a lot of the obstacles, a lot of the emotions, the high stakes, everything that these paramedics have to deal with on a daily basis, and the struggles of the internal conflict that they demonstrate on scene, that they have to self-medicate, they have to self-help, they don't know where to reach. There is a lot to really break down a good character study in this film. Now, don't get me wrong, walking out of this movie the first time, I saw flaws, I saw exaggeration, but the fantastic performances of Penn and Sheridan encouraged me to go back and revisit. With each viewing, I grew a greater appreciation to not only the performances, but the direction and the raw, simplistic screenplay that challenges the audience to question their own opinions of what's right and what's wrong. Now, as we kind of look at the flaws, Asphalt City spends so much time feeding us scenes of chaos for our paramedics, and some seem to blend together with the same situational setup. From numerous gangs, attempts at violence on our paramedics, there never seems to be a situational break to have our paramedics visit an event that seems tame. About the halfway mark, this is where it starts to become a little blended and exaggerated, even though I'm sure these situations do happen, and some of these are pulled from real situations, but I'm sure we don't see this with every call our paramedics go on. The film would have been wise to give us at least one kind of tame call to allow our characters to simmer with the audience. And you know what? I can understand what our filmmakers were trying to do, and the intent is well executed, but I couldn't help but have this question mark of the situational unbelievability, and this made me lose a little bit of credibility with the story. Asphalt City is flawed at times of its balance of its pacing between how it gives examples of pain, emotion, and human character, but where it has its flaws, there is enough here to give you thrills of not action on screen per se, but an adrenaline rush of asking the audience, what would you do? But before you have time to even think what you would do, the movie challenges you and puts you in our paramedic shoes with either another moral dilemma or attempting to allow us to really understand our characters. But just like our characters, we barely get the time to understand them, for they don't have time to understand their own demons. It's uncomfortable, it's hard to watch, it's raw. It will make you uncertain how you feel after leaving the theater, but that's what it sought out to do. I'm giving Asphalt City 3 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. And please don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you haven't checked out our new show, Back to the Balcony, the link to that show will be in the description of this episode. Until next week, do me a favor. Make sure you stay till after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film, and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show, or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.